Get out of my way." Luca Bellondi grabbed the glass from the bartender's hand. Without looking at him, his eyes locked across the crowded room where Adriana Moretti was laughing. Really laughing with a man he had never seen before. His jaw tightened. His knuckles whitened around the glass. In 38 years, nothing had ever made Luca Bellondi feel like he was losing something he never even admitted he wanted. Until right now. Before we go further, if this story is already pulling you in, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Adriana Moretti had worked for Luca Bellondi for exactly 4 years, 3 months and 11 days. She knew the number not because she counted obsessively, but because she had started the job the same week her mother went into the hospital for the first time, and she had marked time the way people do when life splits into a before and an after. Before Luca's office, before the marble floors and the heavy silences, and the way every single person in that building walked like they were afraid the ground might swallow them whole. She was not afraid. That was the thing nobody understood about Adriana Moretti. Everyone else who worked for Luca Bellondi, the security men, the lawyers, the financial advisors who earned more in 1 month than most people earned in a decade, they all moved through his world like they were walking through a minefield. Careful, precise, eyes always watching for the signal that they had said the wrong thing, or moved too slowly, or existed in a way that disappointed him. Adriana made his coffee the way he liked it without being asked. She corrected errors in his legal documents before he ever saw them. She rescheduled his meetings around the moods she had learned to read in the set of his shoulders, and the particular way he clicked his pen when he was thinking versus when he was impatient. She understood Luca Bellondi better than anyone in his organization. And for 4 years, 3 months, and 11 days, she had told herself that was a professional skill. Nothing more. She told herself that on a Thursday evening when she stayed until midnight finishing a contract review and found a cup of fresh espresso sitting on her desk with no explanation. She told herself that on a Tuesday morning when he passed her in the hallway and just paused and said, "Your sister's presentation. How did it go?" Because she had mentioned it once, in passing, 2 weeks earlier, and he had remembered. She told herself that every single time his eyes followed her across a room and she pretended not to notice. Professional, that was the word she lived inside. So when Marco Vitale told her 3 days before the Carnvale gathering that her attendance was expected, she treated it the same way she treated every other request that came from Luca's world. She said yes. She planned accordingly. She arrived in a black dress that was elegant without being remarkable, because remarkable was not something Adriana Moretti aimed for. She just wanted to get through the evening. The Carnvale gathering was not a party in any sense of the word that normal people used. It was held in the private wing of a building that the Bellondi organization technically owned through 4 layers of shell companies, and the guest list included people whose names you would recognize from newspapers, but not for reasons they would want to discuss publicly. Politicians, judges, men who ran industries that touched every corner of the city. And then there were the people like Adriana, the essential machinery, the ones who kept the operation running quietly and without drama, and who were invited not because they were celebrated, but because excluding them would create a gap in the room that people might notice. She had been to 3 of these gatherings before. She knew how to move through them, smile politely, accept a glass of something she would barely sip, find a comfortable corner near enough to the action that she appeared engaged, and far enough away that nobody expected her to perform. She found her spot near the bar on the east side of the room, set her clutch on the ledge, and began the familiar process of being invisible in plain sight. "You look like someone who would rather be reading." She turned. The man standing beside her was not someone she recognized, and in a room full of people she had carefully catalogued over 4 years, that was immediately interesting. He was tall, with the kind of easy confidence that came not from power, but from simply not caring very much what anyone thought of him. His suit was good but not ostentatious. His smile reached his eyes. "That's either an insult or a very specific compliment," Adriana said. "Compliment, definitely." He extended his hand. "Ethan Cole. I'm here with the Marchetti Development Group. Entirely lost, if I'm being honest." "Adriana Moretti." She shook his hand. "I work for the host." "Ah." He glanced around the room with an expression that was more amused than impressed. So you can tell me who everyone is. I can tell you who everyone thinks they are, she said, which is a different thing entirely. Ethan Cole laughed. Not a polite, obligatory laugh. A real one, surprised out of him. The kind that made the people nearby glance over briefly before returning to their conversations. Adriana felt something loosen in her chest. Something she hadn't realized had been wound tight. Okay, he said. Tell me everything. She did not tell him everything, of course. But she told him enough. Enough to be entertaining. She pointed out the city councilman who was terrified of dogs despite the 3 photos of rescue greyhounds on his campaign website. She described the property developer near the window, who had once, in a meeting she attended, spent 7 minutes arguing passionately about the correct way to fold a pocket square. She talked to Ethan Cole for 40 minutes. In 40 minutes, she used muscles she had forgotten she had. The muscle that produced genuine laughter. The muscle that formed opinions and stated them directly without calculating their consequences first. The muscle that let her be Adriana, just Adriana, without the modifier of Luca Belandi's secretary attached. She was not thinking about Luca. She did not see him standing at the far end of the room, glass untouched in his hand, watching her with an expression that Marco Vitale, standing 2 feet to his left, had never seen on his face before. Boss. Marco kept his voice low and measured. The Farini brothers arrived. They want a word about the Riverside proposal. Luca did not look at Marco. He was watching the way Adriana tilted her head when she said something she found funny. The way her hand moved when she was making a point. The way the man beside her, the stranger, the nobody, the businessman who had no business being in this room, leaned slightly toward her, like she was the only source of warmth in a cold building. Boss, tell them to wait, Luca said. Marco paused. The Farini brothers don't wait, sir. You know that. Tell them, Luca repeated, his voice dropping to the particular register that meant the conversation was over, to wait. Marco told them to wait. Luca stood where he was and watched and felt something happening inside his chest that he did not have a name for because he had spent 20 years making sure he would never need one. The moment that broke him was not dramatic. It was small. Ordinary. The kind of moment that would mean nothing to anyone watching from the outside. Adriana said something he was too far away to hear what, and Ethan Cole responded. And then Adriana threw her head back slightly and laughed. Not the controlled, polite smile she wore in business meetings. Not the professional warmth she extended to clients and colleagues. A real laugh, unguarded and unplanned, and she brought her hand up briefly to cover her mouth the way she always did when something caught her off guard. Luca Belandi had seen that gesture exactly once before. He had made a dry comment about a particularly absurd legal filing 2 years ago, not meaning to be funny, and Adriana had reacted before she could stop herself. That same surprised laugh, that same hand, those same few seconds where the professional mask slipped and she was just herself. He had thought about that moment more times than he would ever admit to a living soul. And now some stranger was getting it easily, casually, without even trying, and Luca's grip on his glass tightened until the crystal creaked. You need to go over there, said a voice beside him. He turned. Rosa Belandi, his aunt, 73 years old and completely impossible to manage, was watching the same direction he had been watching, so, with an expression of calm certainty that Luca found deeply aggravating. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. Yes, you do. She patted his arm. You've been staring at that girl for 4 years like she's a painting you're afraid to touch. Meanwhile, she's over there actually talking to a man who isn't afraid of her. Adriana is my employee. Adriana is a person, Rosa said simply. And she looks happy. When did you last make her look like that? Luca had no answer. Rosa walked away. He stood alone with his untouched drink and the particular unfamiliar weight of a question he did not know how to answer. He did not approach her that night. That was not how Luca Belandi operated. He did not rush. He did not react without calculation. Every move he made in business and in life was deliberate, considered, positioned for the optimal outcome. He told himself he was simply observing. He told himself his interest in Ethan Cole was professional caution. A stranger in his circle. An unknown variable. It was entirely reasonable to note the interaction and research the man's background. He told himself all of this with great conviction on the drive home, in the practiced internal voice of a who has spent decades being rational about everything. By the time his car pulled through the gates of his property, he had almost believed it. And then his phone buzzed with a message from his head of security, Ethan Cole, 35, legitimate businessman, no criminal record, no known affiliations. Attending as a legitimate guest of the Marchetti Group. No concerns. Luca read the report twice. Then he set his phone face down on the table and stared at the ceiling of his study for a long time. Monday arrived, the way Mondays always arrived in the Belandi organization, with a schedule that began at 7 in the morning and did not permit sentiment. Adriana was at her desk when Luca walked through at 7:15. She had his coffee ready, his schedule printed, and 3 items flagged for his immediate attention. She handed him the folder without looking up from her screen. He took it. He stood there a moment longer than he needed to. "Good morning," he said. Adriana looked up then, because Luca Belandi did not typically open with good morning. He opened with the first agenda item, or with a question about whether a particular document had been filed, or occasionally with silence. "Good morning," she said carefully. "The Moretti contract has an issue in Section 12. I've marked it." He nodded and moved into his office. She watched the door close behind him and felt something she couldn't quite identify sitting in the air between where she sat and where he had just been standing. She shook it off and went back to work. By 10 o'clock, she noticed that he had walked past her desk 3 times without a reason. He never did that. Luca Belandi moved through his building with surgical efficiency. He went where he was going, and he came back when he was done, and he did not pace. At 11:30, he appeared in the doorway. "The gathering on Friday," he said. "Did you find it acceptable?" She looked at him. "It was fine. Same as the others. You seem to enjoy yourself." There was something in the way he said it. Not accusatory. Not warm. Precisely calibrated to sound casual, which was exactly the problem, because Luca Belandi did not do casual. "I did," she said. "I had a good conversation," a pause, "with the Cole man. With Ethan, yes. You're on a first-name basis." Adriana set down her pen. "We spoke for about 40 minutes. Yes, I know his first name. Is there something work-related I can help you with?" His jaw shifted slightly. A movement so small that most people would miss it. Adriana had been studying Luca Belandi's face for 4 years, and she did not miss it. "No," he said. "Carry on." He went back into his office and closed the door. Adriana stared at the closed door for 10 seconds. Then she picked up her pen and went back to the Moretti contract, and told herself, firmly and with great determination, that she had imagined whatever that was. She had not imagined it. By Wednesday, the pattern had established itself clearly enough that she could no longer pretend it wasn't there. Luca was present in ways he had never been present before. Not intrusively, he was too controlled for that, but observantly. She would look up and find him in a position where he could see her desk. He found reasons to stop meetings that ran into her lunch hour. He reassigned a client visit that would have required her to travel to Boston for 3 days, replacing her with a junior associate. And when she pointed out that she had handled the Rosario account for 2 years and was the obvious choice, he said, without looking up from his desk, "Miller can manage it," and that was the end of that. "You're acting differently," she said on Wednesday afternoon. She had walked into his office with a document he needed to sign, and she had decided, somewhere between her desk and his door, that she was not going to pretend she hadn't noticed. Luca looked up. "I'm working. You've sent me home 3 times this week before 7. You've never done that." She set the document on his desk. "You reassigned the Rosario visit without asking me. You've walked past my desk today more times than you've walked past it in any given month." He picked up his pen. "Is there a question in there? What is going on with you?" The pen stopped moving. The silence in that office was a specific kind of silence that Adriana had learned over 4 years. There was the silence that meant he was thinking about a business problem. There was the silence that meant he was deciding how much to tell someone. And then there was this silence, new, unfamiliar, weighted differently than anything she had experienced in his presence before. "The Rosario account requires travel," he said finally. "You have other priorities here. You've never decided my priorities for me. I'm the one who determines operational requirements." Luca. Her own voice surprised her. Quiet but direct. "This started after the gathering. After I talked to Ethan Cole. And I need to understand what's happening, because I cannot do my job if I don't understand the rules I'm working under." The longest pause yet, he set his pen down. He looked at her, and for one fraction of a second, the thing behind his eyes, the thing she had caught glimpses of over 4 years, the thing underneath the control and the power and the carefully maintained distance, was visible. Then it was gone. "You're right," he said. "The reassignment was an operational call, not a personal one. I'll reconsider if you feel strongly about the Rosario account." It was a perfect deflection. Controlled. Reasonable. Exactly the right thing to say to close the conversation without revealing anything. Adriana picked up the folder she had carried in. "Reconsider," she said. "I'll send you the updated travel proposal." She walked out of his office. She kept her back straight and her steps even, and she did not let herself breathe until she was back at her own desk with the office door closed between them. Then she sat down very carefully and thought about that one fraction of a second. Marco Vitale found her in the archive room at 4:30. She was filing documents she had already filed twice, which Marco noticed, because Marco noticed everything. "You had a conversation with him," Marco said. "It was not a question. We have conversations regularly. It's part of the job. A different kind." Marco settled himself against the shelving in a way that suggested he intended to stay for a while. "I've worked with Luca Bellondi for 17 years. I've seen every version of him. He doesn't walk past desks repeatedly. He doesn't reassign travel accounts without strategic reason." Adriana continued filing. "I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to be careful," Marco said. "That's all. Whatever you think you might be seeing, whatever it feels like, from where you're standing, Luca's world is not a safe place for feelings. You're assuming I have feelings about it." "I'm assuming," Marco said, "that you're not as calm as you're pretending to be." She turned to look at him then. Marco Vitale had the face of a man who had seen a great deal and kept most of it to himself. Right now, his expression was something she had not expected. Not threatening, not politically calculated. Concerned. "What happened to the last person who got close to him?" she asked. Marco was quiet for a moment. "She left," he said, before he could make the choice. "He spent 6 months running the organization like a machine and talking to nobody, and I thought I was going to lose him to the kind of cold that gets inside a man's chest and never comes out." He pushed off the shelving and straightened his jacket. "I'm not telling you to go," he said. "I'm telling you to know what you're walking into." He left. Adriana stood in the archive room with a folder she had filed 3 times and thought about a man who ran the most feared organization in New York and apparently had never in his life figured out what to do when someone got inside his defenses. She thought about that for a long time. On Thursday morning, Ethan Cole called her. She had given him her professional card at the gathering, the one with her work contact information, because he had asked about property consultations, and she occasionally fielded those inquiries. It was a professional exchange, completely ordinary. He asked if she would like to have coffee. She was standing in the hallway outside the conference room when the call came through, and she said yes easily. Without the calculated pause she sometimes gave to invitations, because the conversation on Friday had been good, and there was nothing wrong with having coffee with a pleasant, uncomplicated man who worked in property development and had no idea who Luca Bellondi really was. She did not plan to tell Luca. It was not his business. She had coffee with Ethan at a place 2 blocks from the office on Thursday afternoon. During the hour she was not on the clock, and it was exactly what it was: pleasant, easy, uncomplicated. He was funny in an unperforming way. He asked good questions and listened to the answers. He did not know about her boss's criminal organization or her complicated internal landscape or the 4 years of carefully maintained professional distance that had apparently been doing something entirely different underneath the surface. She came back from coffee feeling lighter than she had in weeks. She came back to find Luca standing at the window of her office. Not his office, her office. He was looking at the street below with his hands in his pockets, and when she opened the door he turned, and whatever expression had been on his face reset into its default setting of professional neutrality before she could read it. "You were out," he said. "I was on my lunch hour. For an hour and 20 minutes. She set her bag on her desk. "I didn't know you were tracking the time. I needed a document." "Which one?" "The Farini Amendment. It's in the blue folder on the left side of my desk, where it has been since Tuesday morning." A pause. He looked at the desk. The blue folder was exactly where she said it was. "Right," he said. He picked it up. He walked past her toward the door, And she should have let him go. She knew she should have let him go. But 4 years of watching this man, and 3 days of watching something unfamiliar move through him, like a current he didn't know how to discharge, made her speak before she had decided to. "I had coffee with Ethan Cole," she said. He stopped. His back was to her. She watched his shoulders the way they were carried, the slight adjustment that happened when he processed information he hadn't expected. "I see," he said. The voice was level. It was personal, not business. "That's your right." "Yes," she said. "It is." He walked out. She sat down at her desk and pressed her fingertips to her temples and told herself this was manageable. This was a professional relationship with some unexpected turbulence, and it was entirely manageable. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "Great catching up. Same time next week." She was still looking at the message when Marco appeared in her doorway, and one look at his expression told her that he had seen Luca in the hallway, and that whatever Luca's face had shown in that unguarded moment between her office and wherever he was going, it had been enough to alarm a man who had spent 17 years watching Luca Belandi control everything around him without effort. "Adriana," Marco said carefully. "Don't," she said. "I'm only going to say—"
"Marco." She looked up. "I know what you're going to say."
"And you might be right about all of it. But what I need right now is to do my work. So unless you have something work-related, I need the afternoon." Marco looked at her for a long moment. "He's going to ask you about it," he said finally. "I know. And when he does, be honest with him." He paused. He doesn't know how to handle honesty from people he actually cares about. He's going to be bad at it, but he needs it more than he needs the version where everybody says what he wants to hear. He left without waiting for her response. Adriana sat at her desk. Outside, somewhere in the building, Luca Belandi was holding a file he didn't need and working out what to do with feelings he had spent a lifetime making sure he would never have. She understood, in that moment, something she hadn't let herself understand before. The past 4 years had not been as simple as she'd told herself, and the question of what came next was something neither of them was prepared for. But it was there now, unavoidable and real, sitting in the space between their offices like a door that both of them knew was there, and neither of them had yet decided whether to open. Adriana Moretti had spent 4 years being excellent at her job and invisible in her life. She had a feeling that was about to change. She did not sleep well that night. Adriana lay in the dark of her apartment and stared at the ceiling and replayed the afternoon in a loop she could not stop. The way Luca had been standing at her office window. The particular stillness of his back when she said Ethan's name. The way he walked out without looking at her, which was somehow worse than if he had turned around and said something terrible. 4 years. 4 years of reading that man like a document, learning every inflection and silence and micro-expression, and somehow she had still managed to miss the most important thing. Or maybe she hadn't missed it. Maybe she had seen it and decided very deliberately not to look directly at it. The way you don't look directly at the sun because you know what happens when you do. She was at her desk by 6:45 the next morning. Luca arrived at 7:18, which was 3 minutes later than his usual time, and Adriana noticed because she noticed everything about him, and the 3 minutes told her he had also not slept particularly well. He was wearing his composure the way a man wears a suit that fits perfectly but is slightly too warm for the weather correct in every technical sense, and costing him something invisible. "Good morning," she said. "Morning." He took the coffee she had ready without stopping, which was normal. He was through his office door in 4 seconds, which was also normal. She exhaled. Normal was good. Normal was the thing she was going to hold on to with both hands. She had precisely 40 minutes of normal before Marco Vitali arrived and dismantled it entirely. He appeared at her desk without announcement, which was Marsico's way, and set a single sheet of paper in front of her. Not a memo, not a report, a photograph, printed in black and white from what looked like a security camera feed, showing Adriana and Ethan Cole at the coffee shop 2 blocks from the office. She looked at the photograph. Then she looked at Marco. "Where did this come from?" she asked. "The building's external cameras. They cover the block." He said it without apology. "I want you to understand something before today gets complicated." He asked for it. Not me. He asked the security team for it at 9 o'clock last night. The information settled over her like cold water. "He had me surveilled," she said. "He had the external block surveilled. Technically, everything in the standard security perimeter. Marco's voice was carefully neutral. But yes, he looked at the footage personally. She set the photograph back on the desk face down. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Adriana?" "Thank you, Marco." Her voice was quiet and absolutely steady. "I'll handle it." Marco left. She sat for exactly 2 minutes. She was counting. Then she stood up, picked up the photograph, walked to Luca's office door, knocked once, and opened it without waiting for permission, which she had never done in 4 years. Luca looked up from his desk. The surprise on his face was brief and genuine. She caught the tail end of it before he reassembled himself. She set the photograph on his desk in front of him. "Face up." "Explain this to me," she said. He looked at the photograph. He looked at her. The calculation behind his eyes was visible. For once she could see him working through which version of this he was going to give her. "It's standard security protocol," he said. "The cameras cover. Don't." She cut him off cleanly, and she watched him register the fact that she had just interrupted Luca Bellondi, which was something that did not happen in this building. "I have worked for you for 4 years. I know the security protocols. I know exactly which cameras cover which blocks and what the footage is used for. You had someone pull and personally review footage of my lunch hour. I need you to tell me why." The silence stretched. "You were outside the building alone," he said finally. "I was 2 blocks away during my personal time with a person who has been vetted and found to be completely unaffiliated with anything dangerous." Your own security team's words. She kept her eyes on his face. "Try again." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite discomfort. Luca Bellondi was not a man who showed discomfort, but something adjacent to it. A tightening around the jaw that meant he was encountering a situation his usual tools weren't built for. "I was concerned," he said, "about my safety." "Yeah, Luca." She said his name the way you say the name of someone you are genuinely trying to reach. Not with anger, with precision. "You are not concerned about my safety. You have never pulled security footage of any other employee's personal time in 4 years. You have not had me shadowed or surveilled," or she stopped. She looked at him very carefully. "Have you?" The pause that followed was 1 second too long. "Marco handles the general security reviews," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the answer I'm giving you." She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth, the way she did when she needed to stay level. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear it. Not as your employee, as a person." She waited until she was certain she had his full attention. "What you did was a violation. I understand that in your world, information is safety and surveillance is standard. I understand that you operate inside a system where monitoring people is how you maintain control. But I am not a business asset, and I am not a threat to be assessed. And what I do during my personal hours is my business, not yours." Luca did not speak. "If you have concerns about me," she continued, "you ask me. Directly. The way one person asks another person." She held his gaze. "Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" The silence that followed was the longest she had ever experienced in that office. And then Luca Bellondi, who had not apologized to anyone in living memory, said yes. One word. Quiet. Stripped of everything except the essential admission. She picked the photograph up from his desk and folded it once. "I'm going to go back to my desk," she said, "and I'm going to finish the Farini Amendment review. And we are going to have a professional and functional workday. And then at some point, we are going to have a different conversation about what is actually happening here. Because we both know something is happening, and pretending it isn't is making both of us worse at our jobs." She walked out. She went back to her desk. Her hands were completely steady. She did not know how. The Farini Amendment review took 3 hours and 20 minutes. Adriana worked through it with the focused intensity she applied to everything when she needed her brain to be somewhere other than where it kept wanting to go. She flagged 11 points of concern. She wrote up a summary document. She sent it to Luca's internal inbox without comment. 14 minutes later, a message came back. "Comprehensive work, as always. I'll review this afternoon." 14 words. Professional. Clean. She read it twice. She was trying to decide what to do with the fact that she could hear his actual voice in those 14 words, the particular rhythm of how he spoke when he was being careful. When her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan Cole confirming their next week's coffee. She typed back a quick confirmation and set her phone face down on the desk. She was not going to cancel it. She had thought about it this morning, in the dark of her apartment, while her ceiling told her nothing useful. She had considered whether continuing to see Ethan was worth the complication it was clearly creating. She had weighed it the way she weighed everything: practical considerations, likely outcomes, cost versus benefit. And then she had realized that the very act of weighing it meant she had already conceded something she wasn't willing to concede. She was not going to arrange her personal life around what created the least friction in Luca Belandi's emotional landscape. She was not going to become smaller to make him more comfortable. That was the line. She knew exactly where it was, and she was not going to cross it, even if standing on her side of it cost her something. She just hadn't quite admitted to herself yet what that something might be. At 2:15 in the afternoon, Marco appeared again. This time he sat down in the chair across from her desk, which he never did, and folded his hands on his knee, with the demeanor of a man who had made a decision about something and was going to see it through. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You told me about the photograph. That was enough. Not about the photograph, about him." He paused. "About what happened 5 years ago that you don't know about." Adriana set down her pen. Marco was a man who operated on a strict economy of information. He said what was necessary. He withheld everything else. The fact that he was sitting in her office voluntarily offering context told her this was not a casual conversation. "Tell me," she said. Marco looked at his hands for a moment. Her name was Sophia. She worked in the legal division. She was intelligent and principled, and she had no business being inside Luca's world, which is exactly why he was drawn to her. He paused. It went on for almost 2 years, quietly. The way things go when two people are being careful. "What happened?" "She was used," Marco said simply, "by a rival organization that identified her as a proximity point, someone close enough to Luca to be valuable. They didn't hurt her physically. They used information she had. Information she had innocently shared because she trusted that being with him made her safe." He looked up. Luca found out on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, she was on a plane out of the country with a new identity and a financial settlement that would keep her comfortable for the rest of her life. Adriana absorbed this. He sent her away. He removed her from danger. Marco's voice was precise. Whether she would have chosen to go, if she had been given the choice, that's a different question. She was not given the choice, and Luca spent the next 3 years making sure it would never happen again. Marco met her eyes. By making sure there was nothing for anyone to use. No vulnerabilities, no proximity points, no one close enough to matter. The room was very quiet. He built the wall back higher, Adriana said, reinforced and fortified and guarded around the clock. Marco's voice carried something that was almost dry, until apparently 4 years ago, when a 24-year-old woman with excellent organizational skills and the extraordinary ability to not be afraid of him walked through the door and started dismantling it without even knowing she was doing it. Adriana looked at her desk, then at the wall, then at the man across from her who had worked for Luca Belandi for 17 years and clearly, underneath all the operational efficiency, genuinely cared what happened to him. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you were right this morning," Marco said. "He should have asked you directly. That's what a man does when he cares about someone. He asks." He paused. "He doesn't know how. He knows how to protect. He knows how to control outcomes. He does not know how to simply ask someone not to go away." Adriana was quiet for a long moment. "Marco," she said finally, "I am not Sophia." "No," he agreed. "You're considerably more difficult." She looked at him. "That," he said, "is a compliment." That evening, Luca appeared in her office doorway at 6:55. She was still at her desk. The building had mostly emptied around her. The assistants and junior staff who kept regular hours had gone home an hour ago. The security team was doing their rotation. Somewhere below, the organization's essential machinery continued without pause, but up here in the administrative wing, it was quiet enough to hear the city outside. "You're still here," he said. "So are you." He came in and sat in the chair across from her desk, the same chair Marco had occupied that afternoon, and for a moment neither of them said anything. There was a different quality to his stillness this evening. The hard-edged control was still there, but something underneath it was not armored in its usual way. "I owe you a real answer," he said. She waited. What I told you this morning about the cameras being standard protocol, that was true in a technical sense. And it was not an honest answer. I know the difference between those two things, and I chose the former deliberately, which was, he stopped, seemed to be selecting words the way a man crosses a frozen river, testing the weight of each step, which was not something I should have done. No, she said. It wasn't. I looked at the footage because another stop. She watched his jaw work slightly. I found myself requiring information I did not have a legitimate professional reason to require, and instead of examining why I required it, I found a technical mechanism to obtain it, which is, his voice took on a brief, almost imperceptible edge of self-directed frustration, which is what I do when I don't want to look at something clearly. What did you not want to look at? She asked. He met her eyes. The fact that I am not indifferent to who you spend your time with, he said, and that my reasons for that are not professional. The words sat between them like something fragile and very heavy at the same time. Luca, she said carefully, what do you want to happen here? I don't know, he said, and the honesty of it was striking, completely uncharacteristic, stripped of the usual scaffolding of certainty he wore like armor. I know what I want in every room I walk into. I have always known. This is the first time in a significant period of time that I do not have a clear answer. She looked at him for a long moment. Can I tell you something? She said. Yes. For 4 years, I have been excellent at my job, in part because I have been very disciplined about what I allow myself to see when I look at you. She said it evenly, without drama. I have filed those observations in the part of my mind marked not relevant and kept them there, because the alternative was complicated in ways that were not good for either of us. He was very still. The photograph this morning changed something, she said. Not because it was an outrageous thing in the context of your world. I understand why it happened. It changed something because it meant that whatever I was filing away was being mirrored, and I don't know how to unknow that. The silence after she finished was long enough that the city outside filled it, the distant pressure of traffic, the low hum of the building's ventilation. The man you had coffee with, Luca said. Is he someone you're interested in? Direct, finally direct. He's pleasant, she said. He's uncomplicated. He makes conversation easy. She held Luca's gaze. He is nothing like working for you. Something crossed Luca's face. Not quite a reaction. Something more honest than a reaction. I can't be uncomplicated, he said. I know, my world is I know what your world is, she said. I have been inside it for 4 years. I know exactly what it is. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not power. Not strategy. Something that looked, stripped of every other word for it, like being seen by someone for the first time in a very long time, and not knowing what to do with the exposure. I pulled the footage because I couldn't stand not knowing, he said. And I could not stand the specific image of you laughing with someone, the way you laughed at the gathering. Easily. Without calculation. He paused. The way you almost never laugh here. The blow of that was quiet and total. Because he was right. She almost never laughed here. Not like that. She was professional and composed and excellent, and she kept herself at a precise measured distance from the full weight of being in this room with this man, and he had just named that truth out loud in a way that made it impossible to put back. That's not entirely my fault, she said carefully. No, he said. It's not. He stood then, straightened his jacket in the automatic movement of a man recalibrating. I'm going to do something differently, he said. I don't have the specific details mapped yet, because I've spent today realizing that the systems I use to map things are not appropriate for particular. He stopped. Something almost wry moved through his expression. Situation. But I'm going to do something differently. She nodded. And the Rosario account, he said. It's yours. I'll reverse the reassignment. She nodded again. He started toward the door. Luca, she said. He turned. The footage from the cameras, she said. Delete it. A beat. Done, he said. He left. She sat alone in her office for a few minutes, the city humming outside, and tried to locate the version of herself from this morning that had believed normal was something she could hold on to. That version seemed a long way away. The following Monday began with a staff meeting that Luca ran with his usual precision, and Adriana sat at the long table in the conference room and took notes and told herself everything was fine, and mostly believed it. What she hadn't expected was Carlo Esposito. Carlo Esposito was the head of the Belandi organization's financial operations. 52 years old, immaculately dressed in the way of men who have used clothing as armor for their entire adult lives. And he had a specific relationship with Adriana that she had managed carefully for 2 years. He did not like her. He found her presence in Luca's inner circle inexplicable. A woman of her age and background with that level of access was, in Carlo's framework, either a liability or a manipulation, and he had never fully settled on which. He had also, in the past, been entirely manageable. Something had shifted. She noticed it first, in the way he positioned himself at the table slightly angled toward her, rather than toward Luca's end, the body language of a man planning to make a point. She noticed it in the way his eyes moved from her to Luca and back again, at intervals that were too regular to be accidental. He was watching something, measuring it. Luca was presenting quarterly projections when Carlo interrupted. Before we moved to Q3, Carlo said, "I want to raise a process question." Luca looked at him with the expression of a man exercising considerable patience. "Go ahead." The Rosario account reassignment. Carlo set his hands flat on the table in the gesture of a man who believes he is being reasonable. "I understand it was reversed. I'm wondering about the rationale for the original reassignment and the reversal. For operational clarity, the table went slightly still. Not dramatically, these were people trained in stillness, but Adriana felt the adjustment. The reversal restored the assignment to the appropriate personnel," Luca said. His voice was completely level. "Adriana has managed the Rosario account for 2 years. It makes no operational sense to reassign it." "Of course," Carlo said. And then, with the precision of a man who had planned exactly where he was going, it simply struck some of us as an unusual series of decisions. The original reassignment, the reversal. Decisions involving Adriana specifically tend to attract a certain amount of attention. The pause that followed was exactly one breath long. "Decisions involving any staff member attract attention when they're unusual," Luca said. "That's how organizations function. Is there a specific operational concern you'd like to raise, Carlo? Or are we done with the process question?" Carlo smiled in the way of a man who has already achieved what he came for. "We're done. Thank you." The meeting continued. Adriana kept her expression neutral and her pen moving and made note of exactly 3 things: that Carlo had chosen a public forum, that he had framed the challenge as a process question rather than a personal one, and that he had used the word us, suggesting he had not arrived at this position alone. After the meeting, she was gathering her materials when Marco appeared at her elbow. "Don't react," he said quietly. "He's watching." She turned the page of her notepad instead. "How long has he been building that since the gathering?" Marco's voice was barely above a murmur. "He has seen something he thinks he can use." "What does he want?" "What he has always wanted. To be the one Luca relies on completely. No one else close enough to have influence." A pause. "He sees you as a variable that should not be inside the equation." She snapped her notepad closed. "What does he know?" "Enough to construct a narrative," Marco said. "Whether the narrative is accurate is irrelevant. He'll make it convincing enough." She straightened her jacket. "All right, Adriana." Marco's voice dropped another register. "He is not going to come at you directly. He's going to come at the perception of you. Your professionalism, your judgment, your reason for being this close to the center." He met her eyes. "Be careful." She thought about Marco's story of Sofia, the woman who had been used as a proximity point, the woman who had not been given a choice. She thought about the photograph on her desk that morning. She thought about Luca in her office the previous Friday, saying done about the footage with a simplicity that had felt like something earned rather than conceded. "I'll be careful," she said. She was precise about it. Tuesday afternoon, the first real blow landed. It came in the form of an email not to her but to Luca's inbox, CC'd to Marco and 2 senior advisors. From Carlo, framed as a security protocol review, raising questions about the information access levels of non-Italian-speaking administrative staff with connections. The word connection sat in the email like something Carlo had placed very deliberately to outside business contacts. It didn't name her. It didn't have to. She found out about the email from Marco, who forwarded it to her with a single line: "Prepare yourself." She read it twice. Then she read it a third time very slowly, making sure she understood exactly what Carlo had built and how well he had built it. It was, She had to admit with the professional detachment of someone who had spent 4 years inside a world where information was weaponized daily, extremely well constructed. It was deniable. It was framed as institutional concern rather than personal attack. It used language that was bureaucratic enough to seem neutral and specific enough to land precisely where it was aimed. She was composing her response equally precise, equally well constructed when her office door opened. "Luca, you've seen it," he said. "Yes." He closed the door behind him. His expression was the one she had cataloged under operational mode, controlled, focused, zero excess. But underneath it, something was moving that she recognized now as something different than it had looked before. "He overstepped," Luca said. "He was careful not to," she replied. "Technically. I know what it is, so do I." She set her pen down. "And I know that the most effective response is not the emotional one. The most effective response is to continue being exactly what I am professionally, and let the record speak for itself." Luca looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully categorize. "You're not angry," he said. "I'm extremely angry," she said. "I'm choosing not to lead with it." Something shifted in his face. A kind of recognition, the particular respect of someone who understands the cost of that kind of discipline because they practice it themselves. "Carlo will be handled," he said. "I don't need you to handle Carlo for me. He used your name without using your name in a communication designed to undermine your credibility in my organization. That is something I handle, Luca." She kept her voice steady. "If you handle Carlo as a reaction to whatever is happening between us, you confirm exactly the narrative he's trying to build. You make me the woman the boss protects, which is not who I am and not the position I want to hold in this organization." She held his gaze. "Let me handle my own credibility. Handle Carlo for the operational reasons, not the personal ones." He was quiet for a moment. "That is an extraordinarily rational position," he said. "Yes, I find it extremely frustrating, I know. Because my instinct is to..." He stopped himself. Reconsidered. Started differently. "I am not accustomed to the correct course of action being to step back." "No," she said. "I imagine you're not." He looked at her for a moment that lasted longer than any business reason could account for. "What can I actually do?" he asked. And that question, that genuine, stripped-down question, from a man who operated by deciding and executing, was more disarming than anything that had happened in the preceding week. "Make sure the record is accurate," she said. "That's all. Make sure that when people look at my work over 4 years, what they see is the work." He nodded once. "Then that's what happens," he said. He started for the door. "And Adriana." He stopped without turning. "The coffee." Cole, a pause. "Go if you want to go. That is not something I will." Another pause, shorter. "That is your choice. Not mine." He opened the door and was gone. She sat at her desk in the quiet that followed. Outside her window, the city continued its indifferent movement. Somewhere in this building, Carlo Esposito was probably feeling pleased with himself. Somewhere down the hall, Luca Belandi was sitting with the particular discomfort of a man who has just done the right thing when the wrong thing would have been considerably more satisfying. Adriana Moretti sat at her desk and understood something she had been circling for a week. The man who left coffee on her desk without explanation. The man who remembered her sister's presentation. The man who had stood in her office looking at the street below and then asked her a question about a file he already had. She had filed all of it under not relevant for 4 years. She was running out of room in that file. The email from Carlo sat in the organization's internal record like a splinter that had gone in cleanly and was working its way deeper. Adriana knew this because she understood how these things moved. She had watched Luca's world operate for 4 years, and she knew that a document didn't have to be referenced to do its work. It just had to exist. It had to be the thing people thought of when they thought of her name. Carlo had not needed to write much. He had needed to write enough. She spent Wednesday doing what she had told Luca she would do, being exactly what she was, professionally, without adjustment or performance. She processed the Rosario account documentation with the thoroughness that had made her indispensable. She flagged 3 contractual irregularities that the legal team had missed. She sat in on a financial review and asked 2 questions that redirected the entire discussion in a way that saved the organization a significant sum of money, and she did it without announcing that she had done it, which was always how she operated. She was good at her job. She had always been good at her job. She was going to let that be the answer to Carlo Esposito. What she had not planned for was Greta Marini. Greta was 47, ran the organization's administrative operations, and had been a fixture in Luca's world for 12 years. She was not warm, and she was not cold. She was precisely calibrated, the way people become when they have survived long enough in a particular environment to understand exactly what the environment requires. She had always treated Adriana with professional respect and nothing more. She appeared at Adriana's desk on Wednesday afternoon with a cup of coffee she had brought herself, which she set down without ceremony, and then sat in the chair across from the desk with the posture of a woman who had decided to do something and was going to do it efficiently. "Carlo is talking to people," Greta said. Adriana looked at the coffee. "I know. He's being careful about it, framing it as concern, using words like instability and distraction." Greta's voice was flat and precise. "He approached me yesterday. What did he say?" "He asked if I had noticed any changes in operational efficiency in the administrative wing. He asked it in the specific way men like Carlo ask things when they already know the answer they want and are looking for someone to confirm it." Greta picked up her own cup. "I told him that operational efficiency in the administrative wing had been consistently excellent and that I had no concerns." Adriana absorbed this. "Thank you. I'm not doing it for you," Greta said plainly. "I'm doing it because Carlo Esposito has been trying to consolidate influence in this organization for 3 years, and I find the project tiresome." She paused. But also, she added, with the slight adjustment of a woman being honest when she has decided to be, "because you are good at this job and you don't deserve to have it used against you." Adriana looked at her. "Greta, what does the organization think is happening?" Greta was quiet for a moment. "The organization thinks what it always thinks when a woman is close to a powerful man, and something changes in his behavior. They are constructing a story. The story is not generous." "What's the story?" "That you have cultivated proximity deliberately. That the access you have was not earned by competence alone." Greta's voice did not soften or sharpen. It stayed exactly where it was. People do not like uncertainty. When they cannot explain something, they replace the explanation they don't have with the one that's familiar. Adriana felt the weight of it settle across her shoulders. Not surprise, not quite. She had understood that this was a possibility from the moment she had confronted Luca about the photograph. She had understood that the moment something shifted between them, the world around them would build its own interpretation. She had just not known how quickly it would move. "What would you do?" she asked Greta. Greta considered the question seriously, which was what Adriana had expected of her. "I would continue doing exactly what you're doing. I would not defend myself to people who have already decided what they think. I would make sure the one person whose opinion actually determines the outcome of this situation understands exactly who you are." She met Adriana's eyes. "Do you know what that person thinks?" "I'm working on it," Adriana said. Greta nodded once and stood. "Then keep working." She took her coffee and walked out. Adriana sat alone for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and went back to the Rosario documentation, because the work was still the work, and the work was the only thing she completely controlled. She did not expect what happened that evening. At 7:30, when the floor was quiet, and she was preparing to leave, her office phone rang. "Internal line," she answered. "Come to the conference room," Luca said. "Please." The please caught her. He did not typically add please to directives. She went. He was alone in the conference room. No files on the table, no meeting materials, nothing to suggest an operational reason for being there. He was standing at the window. She had noticed he did that, took himself to windows when he was working something out, and he turned when she came in. "Close the door," he said. She did. "Carlo met with 3 senior advisors today," Luca said. "Individually. Separately. Not as a group, specifically separately, so there is no single meeting on record. He told each of them that he has observed behavior suggesting that my judgment on certain organizational matters has been compromised." Adriana kept her expression level. "Compromised how?" "He did not say your name," Luca said. "He didn't have to. The implication was complete without it." He moved from the window and sat at the table, something she rarely saw him do in a room that wasn't his office. The informality of it was its own statement. "I found out through 2 of the 3. The third has not come to me, which tells me where that particular person's loyalties are pointing." "What are you going to do about Carlo?" What I should have done 3 years ago, he said. But that's not why I asked you here. He looked at her directly. I asked you here because I owe you something I have not given you, and I have been aware of owing it since Tuesday, and I have been operating under the mistaken belief that time would make it easier to give. He paused. It hasn't. She waited. The thing I told you Tuesday evening about doing something differently, I was imprecise. His voice had the quality of careful construction. I want to be more specific. I want you to understand something about what the past week has required of me and why it has been difficult in ways that are not comfortable for me to admit. She sat down at the table, not across from him, beside him, at the perpendicular corner, the configuration of people talking rather than negotiating. She did it without thinking, and he noticed, and something in his posture adjusted in response to it. I spent 20 years building a system, he said, where I do not need people the way most people need people. I have loyalty. I have structure. I have a specific kind of trust that is transactional. I perform, they perform, and the exchange is clean. He set his hands flat on the table. What I do not have, what I deliberately dismantled, is the kind of reliance where another person's absence creates a problem I cannot solve operationally. Sophia Adriana said. His eyes moved to her face quickly. A brief, sharp movement. Marco told me, she said. Not everything. Enough. He was quiet for a moment. What did he tell you? That you removed her from danger without asking her what she wanted, and that you spent the following 3 years making sure no one could ever be used that way again. She held his gaze. By making sure no one was ever close enough. That is accurate, he said. And then I walked in and started reading you like a document and leaving very precise copy on your desk and apparently dismantling things without knowing I was doing it. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something that acknowledged the absurdity of the situation without surrendering to it. That is also accurate, he said. Luca. She turned toward him. What do you actually want to tell me? Not the system. Not the history. What did you want to say when you called me in here? The question landed on him visibly. She watched him encounter it, the man who had answers to everything encountering a question he had been avoiding because the honest answer required him to be a kind of vulnerable he had not practiced. I am aware, he said slowly, that the way I handled this past week was wrong. Not in the sense of violating protocol, in the sense of treating you as a variable in a situation rather than as a person in a relationship. He paused on the word relationship, as though testing its weight. And I am aware that the reason I did that is because the alternative, which is asking you directly for something and discovering your answer, is something I do not know how to manage without defaulting to control. What would you have asked, she said, if you'd asked directly? The longest silence of the entire conversation. I would have asked, he said, if the man you had coffee with means something to you that I should know about. She looked at him. He doesn't, she said. The change in Luca's face was small and total, a single involuntary release of something he had been holding very tightly. He's pleasant, she continued, and uncomplicated, and spending time with him is easy in the way that things are easy when nothing is at stake. And none of that is what I feel when I walk into your building. She let the statement sit there, unadorned, which is not a comfortable thing to tell you. So now we're even. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, I don't know how to do this. I know, she said. I could tell. I know how to run an organization. I know how to manage risk. I know how to read a room and understand what everyone in it wants, position myself accordingly. He was speaking with a directness she had not heard before, not strategic directness, but the exposed kind. I do not know how to sit across from a person, he stopped, restarted, a person who matters to me, and simply say that. You just did, she said. He seemed to absorb that. I'm going to make mistakes, he said. Significant ones. Probably involving surveillance and inappropriate use of security resources. She laughed. She hadn't meant to, and he heard it, and this time he did smile briefly. Genuinely. The smile of a man who has not used that muscle in a while and finds it unexpectedly functional. I need you to tell me when I do, he said, the way you told me this morning. Directly. Without letting me get away with the technically accurate non-answer. I can do that, she said. And I need, he stopped again. The stopping was so uncharacteristic of him that each one felt significant. I need you to understand that what Carlo has started is going to get worse before it gets better. And that when it gets worse, My instinct will be to protect you in ways you won't want to be protected. I know, she said, and my instinct will be to tell you to step back, which will frustrate me enormously. I know that too. They looked at each other, across the small distance of the conference table's corner, and Adriana felt the particular quality of the moment, the specific gravity of two people who have spent a long time in the same room, finally standing in the same room. Can we try something? She said. What? Instead of the organizational framework and the operational language and the system you've built for keeping everything at distance, can we try just having a conversation? You and me, not boss and secretary, not proximity point and protected asset. Just two people who have been in each other's orbit for 4 years and have apparently accumulated more than either of us planned for. He was quiet. Yes, he said, I think I can try that. Good. She stood. Then walk me to my car, and on the way tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with this organization. He stood, looked at her with a slightly uncertain expression that was completely at odds with everything the world knew about Luca Bellondi, such as anything, she said. Anything real. He thought about it for a moment as they moved toward the door. I read, he said. Old novels. Nothing from the last 40 years. Why old novels? Because people in old novels have the same problems people have now, but nobody has a phone. She laughed again, the real laugh, the unguarded one, and this time he was right there to see it, close enough that he could watch the precise moment it reached her eyes. She did not miss what his face did in that moment. She was choosing to look directly at the sun. What neither of them knew, walking out of that building on a Wednesday evening, was that Carlo Esposito had not finished. He had in fact been more systematic than either of them understood. Thursday morning arrived, carrying the information that Marco had spent 3 hours the previous evening accumulating, and which he brought to Luca at 7 a.m. with the expression of a man delivering something he would prefer not to be delivering. The third advisor, the one who had not come to Luca after Carlo's individual meeting, was Vincent Pace. Vincent had been with the organization for 9 years. He handled European financial relations and had always been, in Luca's assessment, reliable. Vincent had also, Marco now revealed, spent the past 6 months working alongside Carlo on something that was not operational collaboration. It was the slow, careful construction of a case, a picture. A narrative about Luca's decision-making that centered on what Carlo had taken to calling emotional exposure. They had documentation. Not fabricated, they had been too careful for that. They had assembled real decisions, real timeline markers, real examples of Luca's behavior over 4 years and specifically over the past 3 weeks, and they had arranged them into a sequence that told a specific story. The story was, Luca Bellondi was losing his edge, and the reason was a woman in his office who had compromised his judgment without him realizing it. How many people have seen this? Luca asked. Enough, Marco said. Carlo's been distributing it selectively, only to people he's confident share his interests. But selectively in Carlo's hands means strategically, and strategically means effectively. Luca sat with this for a moment. He's building a faction. He's testing the foundation of one. He doesn't have the numbers to move openly yet. He's seeing who comes toward him. Marco paused. There are people who are listening, because they believe the narrative. Because they're uncertain, Marco said. The narrative doesn't have to be believed completely. It only has to create enough uncertainty that when something happens, when a decision is made that they disagree with, they have a framework to hang it on. He met Luca's eyes. He's not trying to overthrow you. He's trying to surround you with enough doubt that your authority becomes consultative instead of absolute. Luca was quiet. For a long moment he used Adriana, he said. He used the perception of Adriana. Marco's voice was precise, which is something different, and something that matters less about her and entirely about you. This was never about whether she's a liability. It's about whether he can make you appear to have one. Does she know? Not the specifics of the faction. She knows about the narrative. She understood it the moment Carlo sent the email. Luca stood, moved, covered the length of the room in 3 steps and came back. Marco tracked this. He had seen Luca Bellondi pace exactly twice in 17 years, and both times it had preceded significant decisions. What would you do? Luca asked. If you were me. I'm not you, Marco said. I'm asking anyway. Marco considered it carefully. Carlo has built his case on the premise that you are thinking with your feelings instead of your head. The expected response, the one he's prepared for, is either to demonstrate that your judgment is unaffected by cutting Adriana out of your inner circle entirely, or to react emotionally and give him exactly the evidence he wants. He paused. Both of those responses confirm the framework he's built. What's the third option? You do nothing he expects, Marco said. You handle Carlo on the merits, with the specific evidence of his 12 months of quiet faction building, which has nothing to do with Adriana and everything to do with Carlo's own ambitions. You make it about what it actually is, a loyalty problem, and you address it without making her the center of the story. He set his hands on his knees. And you do it in a way that makes clear to every person watching that the question of Adriana in your life is not a question anyone else gets to ask. Luca looked at him. That last part is personal, not operational, Luca said. Yes, Marco said. It is. He paused. You've been operational for 20 years. I don't think it's hurting anyone if you're personal about one thing. The meeting Luca called that afternoon was one that Marco later described to Adriana in the approximate terms of a man who had been present at significant events in his life, but still found some of them hard to summarize. Luca gathered his senior advisors, all of them, including Carlo and Vincent, in the main conference room at 2 o'clock. No agenda distributed beforehand. No operational materials on the table. Just Luca at the head and 11 men who had built careers on reading rooms, understanding that this particular room had a specific temperature. He had documentation of his own. Marco had spent 12 months not noticing Carlo's moves, but he had spent 12 months noticing them in the way of a man who files information instinctively, even before he understands why it might be useful. What Marco produced on Thursday morning was 18 months of observations, communications, and patterns that, assembled correctly, told a clear story about Carlo Esposito's project. Luca laid it out without drama. He did not accuse. He did not perform. He presented the information the way he presented financial reports, with precision, with supporting evidence, and with the particular stillness of a man who already knows the outcome and is simply waiting for the room to arrive at the same understanding. Carlo, to his credit, did not collapse. He had lived in this world long enough to know that collapsing when cornered was worse than standing in it. He made his case professionally, even impressively arguing that his actions had been in service of the organization's stability and not personal ambition. Luca let him finish. Then he said, "You built a case designed to redirect attention from your own actions by making another person's presence in my life the central concern. You did it because you believed you understood my vulnerabilities. You were wrong about two things, Carlo. The first is that proximity to someone is a vulnerability. The second is that I don't know my own mind." The room was completely still. "Your access to organizational information will be reviewed as of today," Luca continued. "Vincent's role will be reassigned to an external consultant while a full review of the past 18 months of European financial relations is conducted." He looked at Carlo directly. "You've worked in this organization for 11 years. You will be given the opportunity to resign with appropriate terms, or to remain in a significantly restructured capacity." He paused. "I would recommend the former." Carlo looked at him for a long moment. "This is about her," Carlo said. "One final move." The desperate clarity of a man playing his last card. "No," Luca said. The word was quiet and absolutely certain. "This is about you. And about the 11 years during which I apparently was not as clear about expectations as I believed I was." He held Carlo's gaze. "I am clear now." The meeting ended. Marco told Adriana about it at 4:15, standing in her office doorway. He told it factually, without embellishment, and when he finished, he stood there looking at her with an expression that she could only describe as careful. "How is he?" she asked. Marco considered the question. "He's Luca," he said, "which means he is completely fine and working through 4 things simultaneously, and will not tell anyone how he actually is unless directly asked." She reached for her jacket. "Where are you going?" Marco said. "To ask him," she said. She walked down the corridor to Luca's office. The door was half open. She knocked on the frame and he looked up from his desk, and she saw in his face exactly what Marco had described, the composed surface, and the thing moving underneath it, that composure cost something to maintain. "I heard," she said. Marco moves quickly. "How are you?" He looked at her. The question landed on him the same way it always did, when she asked it plainly, like something he wasn't quite prepared for, even when he should have been. I've been better, he said. Honest. Simple. She came in and sat in the chair across from his desk. Tell me. He was quiet for a moment. Carlo has been in this organization for 11 years. He was someone I trusted. Not completely, you don't trust completely in this world, but within the parameters of what trust looks like here. He looked at his hands. The betrayal itself doesn't surprise me. The fact that I didn't see it clearly earlier is something I am less comfortable with. You were preoccupied, she said. He looked up, a slight shift in his expression. I'm suggesting, she said, that spending the past several weeks experience feelings you didn't know you had was probably affecting your attention in ways that created blind spots. That's not a criticism. It's a fairly human thing to happen. Feelings I didn't know I had, he repeated. Did you know? A pause. I knew something existed, I had categorized it as manageable, and was proceeding accordingly. How's that working? The corner of his mouth. Poorly. She leaned back in the chair. Luca. What you did today in that meeting, was any of it about me? He looked at her steadily. Every decision in that meeting was based on legitimate operational grounds. That's not what I asked. No, he said after a moment. It wasn't only about operational grounds. I don't want to be the reason you make decisions in this organization, she said. That was what Carlo was trying to make you, and I won't be that. But I also, she paused, finding the precise words. I want you to know that what you did today, the way you did it, the way you made it about what it actually was instead of what he wanted it to be, that was not a man whose judgment has been compromised. She held his gaze. That was a man who knows exactly who he is. Luca looked at her across the desk. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to a register that she had rarely heard from him, not authority, not calculation, just something unguarded and entirely himself. You said last night that you could feel the difference between Ethan Cole's world and mine, he said. That nothing was at stake with him. Yes. What is at stake? He said carefully, with me. She looked at him. Everything, she said. The word sat between them without qualification. He did not look away. That is, he said quietly, either the most frightening thing I've heard in years, or the most. He stopped. I don't have the word. You'll find it, she said. She stood. She walked to the door. Adriana. She turned. He was still looking at her from across the room, from behind his desk, from behind 11 years of organizational responsibility and 20 years of deliberate distance, and the specific wreckage of a Wednesday afternoon that had cost him something he'd spent over a decade protecting. Thank you, he said, for asking how I was. She looked at him for a moment. You can always ask me the same question, she said. She went back to her desk. She sat down and put her hands flat on the surface and breathed. Behind her, somewhere in the organization that had spent 4 years watching them from a careful distance, things were shifting. The narrative Carlo had built was dismantled, but the question underneath it, the real question, the one that had nothing to do with Carlo's ambitions and everything to do with two people who had been circling the same truth for 4 years, that question was not answered. It was only at last fully asked, and Adriana Moretti, who had filed 4 years of careful observations in a drawer marked not relevant, understood finally and completely that she had run out of room. The morning after Carlo Esposito resigned, the building felt different. Not quieter exactly, the organization was too large and too constantly in motion for one departure to change its acoustics. But there was a quality to the air that Adriana recognized from the few other moments in 4 years when something significant had shifted in the internal structure. A kind of recalibration. People finding their new positions relative to each other, reassessing what they had understood and what required revision. She felt them watching her differently. Not with hostility. Carlo was gone, and the people who remained were not interested in inheriting his losing position. It was more careful than that. More curious. The specific attention of people who understood that the story they had been told about Adriana Moretti and Luca Bellondi was incomplete, and who were now revising their understanding without quite knowing what to replace it with. Greta Marini stopped at her desk at 8:15 and said without preamble, "You handled yourself well." Then she kept walking. From Greta, that was a standing ovation. Marco appeared at 9 with a revised organizational chart that reorganized 2 divisions without commentary, set it on her desk for distribution, and said, "He's in earlier than usual. Slept badly, I think," and walked away before she could respond. She distributed the chart. She made his coffee. She carried it to his office at 9:15 because that was the normal time, and she was not going to adjust her normal time out of awkwardness about the previous evening's conversation, during which she had told Luca Belandi that everything was at stake, and then walked out of his office like a woman who had simply checked an item off her list. She knocked. He said, "Come in." She set the coffee on his desk. He looked up. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." She turned to go. "Adriana." She stopped. "Sit down," he said. "For a moment, please." She sat. He looked at her across the desk with the expression she had catalogued the previous evening, the one without the armor, the one that cost him something to maintain. He was wearing it again this morning, which told her he had made a decision about something and was going to see it through before he had time to reconsider. "I spent last night," he said, "working out what I want to say to you. I wrote several versions." She raised her eyebrows slightly. "You wrote them? On paper?" Yes. Something moved through his expression, mild self-awareness. "I am aware that writing things down is not typically how adults handle personal conversations." "It's not bad," she said. "What did the version say?" "The first version was very well organized," he said. "It had clear sections. It addressed the professional parameters and the personal context and the proposed framework going forward." He paused. "It read like a contract. What happened to it?" "I threw it away." He looked at his hands briefly. "The second version was shorter, more honest, less organized." Another pause. "I threw that one away too." "What did the third version say?" He met her eyes. "I didn't write a third version. I decided that written versions were the wrong approach, for the same reason that the surveillance footage was the wrong approach, and the Rosario reassignment was the wrong approach, which is that they are all methods of controlling information, rather than simply being in a situation and allowing it to be what it is." She looked at him. "What is the situation, in your assessment?" "The situation," he said, "is that I have been in love with you for approximately 2.5 years and have managed the fact stack very poorly." The words landed in the room with the specific quality of things that are simple and enormous at the same time. She did not move. "I recognize that this is not a neutral piece of information," he continued, with the careful steadiness of a man who has committed to crossing a bridge and is going to keep walking regardless of what the bridge does. "I also recognize that the way I have behaved over the past 2 weeks has not been the behavior of a person who deserved to say that to you. So I am not saying it as a request for anything. I am saying it because you told me last night that everything was at stake, and I thought you should know that the accounting is the same on my end." Adriana breathed. In 4 years, she had watched this man command rooms, dismantle opponents, navigate crises that would have broken most people, and do all of it without visible effort. She had never seen him look the way he looked right now, not uncertain exactly, but present in a way that was entirely unprotected. No strategy underneath it. No calculation. Just a man sitting across a desk from a woman, having said the most uncontrollable thing he could say, waiting. 2.5 years, she said, finally. Approximately. What happened 2.5 years ago? He thought about it. "You told me that the Andover filing was wrong." Not hesitantly. Not as a suggestion. "You walked into my office and you said, 'This is wrong and here is why and here is what it should be instead,' and then you looked at me like you were entirely prepared for any response I gave." He paused. "Nobody does that. People suggest. People imply. People leave things on my desk anonymously." The corner of his mouth moved. "You just walked in and told me I was wrong." "You were wrong," she said. "I was. Completely." Something in his expression settled. "And I looked at you, standing there being right about it without any apparent concern for whether that was convenient for me, and I thought, this is the person. This is exactly the kind of person." He stopped. "And then I spent 2.5 years doing nothing about it because doing nothing was safe, and doing something was." He looked for the word. "Everything," she said. "Yes." She sat with that for a moment. 2.5 years. She went back through her own catalog, every interaction, every look, every cup of coffee left without explanation, every meeting where his attention found her across a room. She had filed all of it. She had been so disciplined. She had been so careful. She understood now, just as afraid as he was. For different reasons and in a different direction, but afraid with equal thoroughness. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All right." "I am not Sophia," she said. "You know that. But I need you to hear it in the specific way I mean it, which is I am not someone who can be removed from a situation for her own protection without being asked. If something becomes dangerous, if the world you operate in creates a problem that involves me, I need to be part of the conversation about how it's handled. She held his gaze. I will not wake up one morning to discover that a decision has been made about my life because you decided the safest outcome for me was the one you controlled. He did not flinch from it. That is a fair requirement. It's not a requirement, she said. It's who I am. The same way you being someone who writes 3 versions of a conversation on paper before you have it is who you are. She let that settle. I'm not asking you to be different. I'm asking you to let me be myself. Yes, he said. Quiet. Absolute. And at work, she said, I remain exactly what I have always been. Your secretary. Your best employee. Objective speaking. The corner of his mouth moved again. More definitively this time. And I don't want special treatment or adjusted protocols or anyone in this building looking at me and seeing anything other than the person who does the job better than anyone else who has ever held it. She kept her eyes on his. Outside of this building is a separate conversation. Understood. Do you actually understand, or are you agreeing because you want me to keep talking? Both, he said. But I actually understand. She looked at him for a long moment. 2.5 years, she said again. I know. I've been filed under not relevant for approximately the same amount of time, she said. For the record. He looked at her with an expression that rearranged itself slowly, like something thawing. That long. That long. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. Not weighted with things unsaid. Weighted with things that had finally been said and were settling into their new places. So Luca said carefully, What happens now? Now, she said, I go back to my desk and process the Fontaine documents that have been waiting since Tuesday, and you review the organizational chart Marco left this morning, and we have a completely normal and professional workday. She stood. And at 6 o'clock if you want, we can have dinner. Not as a boss and secretary, as 2 people who have been in each other's orbit for 4 years, and have apparently been in love for 2.5 of them, and have a significant amount of lost time to account for. He stood. She had not expected him to stand the gesture, had an almost old-fashioned formality that was completely characteristic of him and completely disarming. 6 o'clock, he said. 6 o'clock, she confirmed. She walked out. She got back to her desk and sat down and put both hands flat on the surface and looked at the Fontaine documents and told herself very firmly to focus. She focused for approximately 4 minutes. Then she allowed herself, privately and completely without anyone watching, to feel the full weight of what had just happened. The day that followed was the most surreal professional experience of Adriana's 4-year tenure. Luca Bellondi conducted 3 meetings, reviewed the organizational restructuring documents, took 2 calls from European contacts, and signed off on a financial report, all with the operational precision of a man entirely in command of his world. Nobody watching him would have known that 45 minutes earlier he had told his secretary he had been in love with her for 2.5 years. Adriana processed the Fontaine documents, coordinated with the restructured legal division, handled 4 internal queries that would have previously gone to Carlo's office, and made no visible errors in judgment or execution. Nobody watching her would have known anything was different. They were, she thought, remarkably good at their jobs. At 11:30, Marco appeared at her desk and sat down with the expression of a man who has had a significant morning. He told you, Marco said. She kept her eyes on her screen. Was there a meeting this morning I should know about? He told me at 7 a.m. that he was going to tell you something specific, and that I should know in case it affected the morning's operational schedule. Marco's voice was very precisely neutral. He was not specific about what the something specific was, but I have known Luca Bellondi for 17 years and I did not require specificity. She looked at him. How did he seem? At 7. Marco considered the question with genuine care. He seemed like a man who had made a decision and was at peace with it and was terrified of it in equal measure. He paused, which for Luca is the equivalent of anyone else being extremely happy. She looked back at her screen. We're having dinner tonight. Marco was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its precision and become something more personal. He hasn't had dinner with anyone in 5 years. Not like that. She looked at him. I know, she said. He doesn't know how to be ordinary. Marco said. He knows how to be impressive and controlled and intimidating. He doesn't know how to sit across a table from someone he cares about and just be a person. I'm aware of that. Are you prepared for how badly he might do it? She thought about it seriously. Are you asking if I'm prepared for the fact that it might be awkward and imperfect, and that he will probably default to operational language when he doesn't know what else to say? Yes, Marco, she said. I've spent 4 years learning to read a man who communicates almost entirely in silences and technical deflections. I think I can handle a difficult dinner. Marco looked at her for a moment. Then he stood up. He's lucky, he said simply. He walked away before she could respond. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Adriana's phone rang. External line, she answered. Miss Moretti. A woman's voice. Older, measured, with the particular precision of someone who has spent a lifetime choosing words carefully. My name is Renata Belandi. I am Luca's mother. Adriana set down her pen. Mrs. Belandi, she said. How can I help you? I understand that you are having dinner with my son this evening. The information reached her like cold water. He told you. He called me this morning, Renata said, which he does not typically do on weekdays, and which he has not done to announce any personal matter in approximately 5 years. A pause. He did not tell me much. He is not a man who tells people much, as I suspect you are aware. But he told me your name, and that dinner was happening, and given the context, I thought it was appropriate for me to call. Adriana was very still. What would you like to say, Mrs. Belandi? A pause. I would like to say several things that are probably not my place to say, and so I will restrict myself to one. Another pause, shorter. He is difficult. He has been difficult since he was 8 years old, and he decided he was going to be the person who fixed everything, and he has been fixing things in increasingly complex and occasionally alarming ways ever since. The voice was dry in a way that was familiar. She heard the same quality sometimes in Luca. He does not know how to ask for help. He does not know how to admit when he is lost. He does not know how to be in a room with someone he loves and simply let himself be there without managing the outcome. Adriana absorbed each sentence carefully. I know, she said. Then you know more than most people have managed to figure out in considerably longer than 4 years. A pause. That is not nothing. No, Adriana agreed, it isn't. He needs someone who will not let him manage them, Renata said. He has had people who feared him and people who flattered him, and one person who loved him and was removed from the situation before she could decide what to do with that love. He has not had someone who simply refused to be managed. The pause that followed felt weighted. Am I correct in believing you are that person? Adriana thought about the photograph she had set face up on his desk, the conversation in his office doorway, the conference room, the word everything, sitting in the air without qualification. Yes, she said. Good, Renata's voice adjusted slightly. Not warmer, exactly more settled. Then I will not keep you from the Fontaine documents, which I understand have been waiting since Tuesday. Adriana blinked. He told you about the Fontaine documents. He told me that you were committed to your work, even on a significant personal day, and that he found this characteristic of many things. A pause. Something carefully withheld. He finds many things about you notable. After the call ended, Adriana sat for a moment looking at her phone. Then she smiled. Privately. Completely. She went back to the Fontaine documents. 6 o'clock arrived. Luca appeared in her office doorway in his jacket, which he had put back on after what she suspected had been an afternoon of not wearing it, because Luca Belandi in his office without a jacket was a rare enough event to be notable. He was wearing the jacket the way he wore everything correctly, with complete composure, and underneath the composure was the specific quality she had seen that morning in his office. Present. Unprotected. Ready? He said. Your mother called me, she said. He stopped. Something crossed his face. He stopped again. Recalibrated. I called her this morning, she told me. Adriana stood and reached for her own jacket. She said, you are difficult and have been since you were 8. A pause. That is accurate. She also said several other things. I imagine she did. He had the expression of a man experiencing what it meant to have 2 significant women in his life communicating with each other. It was clearly unprecedented. What did she say? That you don't know how to be in a room with someone you love and simply let yourself be there. She met his eyes, without managing the outcome. The word love passed through his mother's description of him, landed differently than it had this morning. It landed as a thing that had existed longer than 2.5 years. A thing that people around him had seen before he had named it himself. "She's right," he said. "I know." Adriana moved toward the door, toward him. "So we're going to practice tonight. We're going to sit across from each other and eat food and talk about things that have nothing to do with this organization. And when you default to operational language, I'm going to tell you. And when I over-explain something, I'm going to stop myself." She stopped in front of him. "And it's going to be imperfect." "Yes," he said. "And we're going to do it anyway." "Yes." She looked up at him. He was close enough now that she could read every layer of his expression. And what she read was a man who was holding very still because moving felt like too much and also not enough. "Luca," she said quietly. "Stop managing the moment." He breathed out. Just that. A single breath, released. And then something in his face changed, not dramatically, not in a way anyone watching from a distance could have pointed to, but she was not watching from a distance. She saw the precise moment when Luca Belandi, the most controlled man she had ever known, let go of the management of this particular moment, and simply stood in it. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Somewhere quiet," she said. "Where nobody knows you." That's a short list in this city. "I know a place." They walked out together. The restaurant she had chosen was 40 minutes from the building, in a part of the city that the Belandi organization had no specific interest in, run by a family from Naples who cared nothing about New York's power structures and everything about whether their pasta was served at the correct temperature. Nobody looked at Luca when they walked in. She watched him register this, the invisible adjustment of him, who was accustomed to rooms changing when he entered them, and was now in a room that simply continued being itself. They sat across from each other at a corner table, and a woman approximately Rosa Belandi's age handed them menus and left without ceremony, and for a moment they were just two people at a table with menus. "She recommended the orecchiette," Adriana said. "Who?" "The woman who seated us. She said it to me on the way in. You were looking at the room." "I know." She set her menu down. "The orecchiette." He set his menu down too. "All right." The woman came back. They ordered. She left again. "Tell me something," Adriana said. "About the books. The old novels." He looked at her. "What about them?" "Which one?" "The one you go back to." He considered this with the seriousness he brought to everything. "Anna Karenina," he said finally. She raised her eyebrows. "Not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Something American. Hemingway. Something with short sentences and a lot of silence." "Hemingway is too pleased with himself," Luca said, with a directness that surprised a laugh out of her. Real and immediate. He heard it, and something in his expression opened the same thing she had seen at the gathering, the same thing he had admitted to missing. He was close enough this time to see all of it, and she did not look away. "What do you like about Anna Karenina?" she said. "The inevitability," he said. "Every decision is correct by the character's own internal logic, and every decision makes the outcome worse. And Tolstoy never judges any of them. He just watches. He lets the reader hold the grief of it." He paused. "I find that honest." She looked at him. "You identify with the watching. I identify with the understanding that people are almost always doing the thing that makes sense to them, even when it destroys them." She thought about that. "Do you think that about yourself?" "Frequently." No hesitation. "The past 2.5 years, for instance, made complete sense to me. Was also, in retrospect, destroying something I could have had sooner." He met her eyes. "Yes, I identify with it." The food arrived. The woman set it down without ceremony, and told them it was hot and walked away, and they ate, and it was exactly as Adriana had predicted, imperfect. He reached for the wrong glass twice. He started a sentence about the organizational restructuring, and caught himself and stopped, and she said, "Don't worry about it." And he said, "I've talked about work for 20 years. And she said, "I know." And they found their way back to the conversation, with the specific awkward navigation of people who are new at something, and know it. He asked about her family, and she told him her mother, her sister, the apartment she had grown up in, the specific combination of pride and practical love that had shaped her. He listened the way he listened to everything, completely, without looking for the strategic application. She asked about his, and he told her carefully, starting with the organizational history that was reflex and correcting himself, and finding the actual version underneath it. His father's hands. His mother's voice on the phone this morning. The specific loneliness of being the one everyone looked to, which meant being the last person anyone looked after. She told me, Adriana said that you have not done this in 5 years. Dinner like this? No. Was it? She looked for the word. Lonely 5 years. He was quiet for a moment. An honest moment, not a calculated one. Yes, he said. Not in the way that feels acute, in the way that becomes the air. You forget what the room felt like before it got cold, because cold has been the temperature for so long that it seems natural. She looked at him across the small table in the restaurant where nobody knew who he was. It's warmer now, she said. Something happened in his face that she did not have a precise word for. It was not a smile exactly, though his mouth moved. It was more fundamental than that, something in the bones of his expression rearranging into a configuration that looked like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just, for the first time in years, set it down. Yes, he said, it is. They stayed for 2 hours. When they walked out, he held the door, and she walked through, and on the street outside the restaurant, he turned to her and started to say something. She could see him composing it, the slight gathering of intention that preceded his words, and she put her hand on his arm. Don't write the version, she said. He stopped composing. Just say it, she said. Whatever it is, just say it. He looked at her. And then, without the scaffolding of preparation, without the carefully chosen words, he said, I don't want to drive away yet. She looked up at him. Then don't. They stood on the street while the city moved around them, indifferent, continuous. Emus unconcerned with the two people standing still in the middle of its motion, and neither of them moved for a long moment. I'm going to be bad at this sometimes, he said. I know. I'm going to default to control when I'm scared. I'm going to handle things I should ask about. I'm going to be, he paused. I'm going to be difficult in the specific way I have been difficult since I was 8 years old. Your mother covered that, she said. She would. He looked at her. What I'm saying is,
I know what you're saying.
she held his gaze. I'm not asking you to be different. I'm asking you to be honest. There's a difference. Yes, he said, there is. The city moved around them. Headlights. Voices. The indifferent, alive pulse of New York at 7:40 on a Thursday evening, which had no idea and did not care that something irreversible had happened in a quiet restaurant where nobody knew anyone's name. Tomorrow, she said, 6 a.m., I'll be at my desk. 6:15, he said. I'll bring the coffee. She looked at him. He had never once in 4 years brought the coffee to her. She had always brought it to him. The gesture was small and complete. All right, she said. She walked to her car. She did not look back because she did not need to. She could feel him standing there, watching her go, in the particular way of a man who has discovered that watching someone leave is different when you know they are coming back. In the morning, she was at her desk at 6 a.m. At 6:15 exactly. Her office door opened. Luca Bellondi set a cup of espresso on her desk, made the way she liked it, which he had apparently known, she realized, without ever being told. He looked at her. She looked at him. Good morning, he said. Good morning, she said. He went to his office. She picked up the coffee and held it in both hands and felt the warmth of it, and understood that this was what it looked like when a man who had spent decades building walls decided, finally, to leave one door open. She had walked through it. She was not walking back. The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale. Adriana had not expected them to be, and the fact that they weren't was, in its own way, the most reassuring thing about them. Fairy tales were clean. They moved from problem to resolution without the friction of two actual people learning how to exist in the same space without their usual defenses. What happened between Adriana Moretti and Luca Bellondi in the weeks after a Thursday evening dinner at a restaurant where nobody knew their names was considerably messier than a fairy tale, and considerably more real, and on balance, she preferred it. He brought her coffee every morning at 6:15. That part was consistent. That part he had apparently decided on and committed to with the same finality he committed to everything, and she had learned not to argue with Luca Bellondi when he had committed to something, because arguing was like arguing with the architecture of a building. You could have opinions about it, but the building was not going to move. The rest of it was navigation. He was, as advertised, difficult. He defaulted to control when he was uncertain. He managed outcomes reflexively, the way other people breathed, and catching himself doing it and stopping was a process that required visible effort and did not always succeed. 3 times in the first 2 weeks, she had to say to him, directly and without softening, that a decision had been made about something in her life without her input, and 3 times he had stopped and looked at her with the expression of a man who had genuinely not noticed he was doing it and was genuinely troubled by that fact. "I don't always know when I'm doing it," he told her on the second Friday, sitting across from her at the same restaurant where nobody knew them, which had become their place without either of them formally deciding it was their place. "I know," she said. "That's the part that needs work. How do I—" He stopped, reconsidered. "What does it look like from outside when I'm doing it?" She thought about it seriously, like you've already processed the outcome, and you're presenting me with the result without having included me in the processing. Like you've run the meeting in your head, and I'm getting the minutes instead of the seat at the table. He was quiet for a moment. "That is extremely accurate. I know. It's also," he said, "how I treat every situation. I don't run the meeting with anyone. I run it and distribute the minutes." "Yes," she said. "And with organizational decisions, that's your prerogative. With decisions that involve my life, I need to give you the seat," he said. "The actual seat," she said. "Not a courtesy seat where you've already decided the outcome, and you're asking for my input as a formality." He looked at her with the expression she had come to understand was him absorbing something he found uncomfortable and choosing to absorb it anyway, rather than deflecting. "I'll work on it," he said. "I know you will," she said. And she meant it, which was the part that mattered. She was not saying it to be kind. She meant it because she had watched this man operate for 4 years, and she knew, better than almost anyone alive, that when Luca Bellondi committed to something, it stayed committed. He was working on it. That was enough. Marco noticed the change in the organization before most people did, because Marco noticed everything before most people did, and had the additional advantage of 17 years of baseline data. What he noticed first was not anything dramatic. It was small. Luca started arriving to meetings 2 minutes earlier than he needed to, which meant he was occasionally already in the room when people arrived, which meant he was occasionally exchanging preliminary conversation with people before the meeting formally began, which he had never in Marco's memory done deliberately. He asked questions that were not strategically motivated, not designed to gather information for later use, but asked because he wanted to know the answer. He remembered and referenced personal details about people that they had mentioned in passing. "He's present," Marco told Greta Marini one Tuesday morning, "in the way of a man reporting something he finds both encouraging and slightly disorienting." "He's always been present," Greta said. "He's been attentive," Marco corrected. "There's a difference. Attention is what you give to things that matter strategically. Presence is he searched for the word. It's the thing you give when you've decided the people in the room matter as people." Greta looked at him. "You've been thinking about this." "I've been watching it happen for 6 weeks," Marco said. "I've had time to develop a framework." What Marco did not tell Greta, because there were things Marco kept to himself, regardless of circumstances, was that Luca had stopped by his office 3 weeks earlier, at 7 in the morning, and sat down in the chair across from his desk and said, without preamble, "Tell me something about the people in the organization that I don't know. Something personal. Something they'd want me to know, but haven't told me." Marco had looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" he'd asked. "Because I've been running this organization for 12 years, Luca said, "and I know the operational value of every person in it, and I don't know nearly enough about who they actually are." He paused. "That's something I'd like to change." Marco had told him 6 things. About the analyst whose son had just been diagnosed with something serious. About the legal associate who was supporting 3 younger siblings through school. About the financial officer who was 3 years from retirement and worried about what came after. Luca had listened to all 6 without interruption. The following week, the analyst had been quietly moved to a more flexible work arrangement. The legal associate had received a compensation review that nobody announced. The financial officer had been asked, in a private meeting, whether he had considered a consulting role post-retirement and whether the organization could support that transition. None of it was announced. None of it was performed. Marco had watched all 3 of them carry the weight of being seen by someone they had assumed did not see them, and he had understood something that he had spent 6 weeks slowly articulating. Adriana Moretti had not changed Luca Bellondi. She had given him a reason to become the version of himself that had always existed underneath the architecture of control he had spent 20 years building over it. That was different. And it was, Marco thought, considerably more than most people managed to do for each other in a lifetime. The second Carnival gathering was announced 6 weeks after the first dinner. Adriana saw the invitation on her desk and felt the specific gravity of it before she fully processed why. Then she processed why. The first gathering was where it had started, or rather, where it had become visible, where Ethan Cole had made Luca face something he had been successfully not facing for 2.5 years. Where Rosa Belandi had said, "You've been staring at that girl like a painting you're afraid to touch." She RSVP'd the same way she always had. Attendance confirmed. No indication of the fact that this one was different. She told Luca about it at 6:25 on a Wednesday morning, standing in his office doorway with the organizational calendar. "I know," he said. "Rosa organized it. Your aunt. She organizes them all. She's been organizing family gatherings since 1987, and she will continue until someone physically prevents her, which nobody has ever successfully done." He looked at Adriana. "She asked if you were coming." Adriana looked at him. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I expected so." A pause. She said, "Good." And then she said something else that I am choosing not to repeat at 6:25 in the morning. "What did she say?" "She said it was about time." Adriana felt the smile before she could stop it. "She's been waiting longer than you have," Luca said. There was something in his voice, dry and fond, and slightly rueful, in the way he was when Rosa was involved. "She told me 3 years ago. I told her she was projecting." "Were you wrong?" "Comprehensively," he said. She went back to her desk. She did not make any particular adjustment to what she planned to wear. She was not going to perform anything. She was going to go to the gathering, the same way she went to everything, as exactly who she was, and whatever that looked like to the people in that room was something she had decided was not her problem to manage. She realized, been spending a significant amount of her life managing how she appeared to rooms, making herself smaller, quieter, less visible, filing her own reactions under not relevant. Operating at the careful, measured distance that she had told herself was professionalism, and had actually been, she understood now, fear. The specific fear of wanting something, and being visible about wanting it, and having the visibility be the thing that caused the loss. She was done filing things under not relevant. She had run out of room in that drawer, and she was not going to build a bigger one. The gathering was on a Saturday. She arrived in a dress that was not black, which was the first departure from her previous 3 appearances. It was a deep green that her sister had picked out 8 months ago, and that she had never worn because she had decided it was too visible. She wore it. She did not go looking for a corner near the bar. Rosa Belandi found her within 4 minutes of her arrival, which Adriana suspected was not coincidental, and took her by the arm with the grip of a woman who had been waiting for this specific moment and was not going to waste it. "Green," Rosa said, with the satisfaction of a woman whose predictions have been validated. "Good. Hello, Rosa," Adriana said. "He's nervous," Rosa said without transition. "He doesn't get nervous. He got here 40 minutes early and has been pretending to have conversations with people he sees every week while actually watching the door." Rosa patted her arm. "That is nervous for Luca." Adriana looked across the room. He was not watching the door right now. He was watching her. He had seen her the moment she came in. She understood that from the particular quality of his stillness, the same stillness she had learned to read over 4 years and could now read in her sleep. He was in a conversation with 2 men she recognized from the European financial contacts, and he was conducting it with apparent ease, and every part of his attention that wasn't visible was on her. She held his gaze from across the room for a moment. His expression did not change in any way that the men he was talking to could have identified. But she was not the men he was talking to. She saw the adjustment, the slight, involuntary ease of a man who has been waiting for something and has found it. She looked away first. Let him finish his conversation. Rosa was watching all of this with the expression of a woman who has won an argument she was having in her head for 3 years. "He told me about Sophia," Rosa said quietly. After a moment, Adriana looked at her. "He told you?" "He tells me things he doesn't tell anyone else. Not often. Not in detail. But he called me last month and said that he had told you about what happened and that you had said you were not Sophia and that you had meant it in a specific way that he was still working out how to fully deserve. Rosa looked at her with eyes that were very sharp and very warm simultaneously. Are you actually not afraid of any of it? Adriana thought about the question honestly. I'm afraid of exactly one thing, she said. And it's not his world or his history or his organizational complications. What is it? The same thing everyone's afraid of, she said. That I'll get it wrong. Rosa looked at her for a long moment. Then she squeezed her arm once, firmly, the way women of a certain generation express things they consider too important for words. You won't, she said. She moved away into the crowd. Luca found her 40 minutes into the gathering, not because he had been working up to it. She got the difference between that and what this was. He simply finished his conversation, crossed the room, and arrived beside her with the directness of a man who has decided where he's going and is going there. You're not near the bar, he said. I decided the corner was overrated. You look stopped. Reconsidered. The green, he said. My sister picked it. Your sister has good judgment. They stood together, and the room moved around them, and people noticed, because people in this room noticed everything, and the noticing had a different quality than it would have had 6 weeks ago. Not the constructed narrative of Carlo's speculation. Something more straightforward. Luca Bellondi was standing beside his secretary at a family gathering, close enough that their proximity was not accidental, and his posture had the specific ease of a man who is exactly where he intends to be. Adriana felt the room registering this, and felt, for the first time in 4 years at one of these gatherings, completely unconcerned about it. Rosa told me you arrived 40 minutes early, she said. A pause. The traffic was light. The building is 12 minutes from here in Saturday traffic. I left early. She looked at him sideways. He stopped. The word clearly required some internal negotiation. Anticipating. You were nervous, she said. I was anticipating, he repeated, with the dignity of a man who was going to maintain this position regardless of the evidence. She smiled. He saw it, and something in him settled, visibly, the way it always did when she smiled at him, without the professional distance she had spent 4 years maintaining. He still looked slightly surprised by it each time, which she had decided was the most quietly devastating thing about him. I want to introduce you to someone, he said. She looked at him. Who? Donato Farini. He said the name with a particular tone of a man acknowledging a complicated reality. He's been in this organization for 22 years. He knew my father. He has had reservations about my recent decisions, which he has expressed to me directly, which I respect. What kind of reservations? The kind that Carlo tried to manufacture and failed, Luca said. Except genuine. Donato's concern is real. He is not building anything. He is not positioning himself for anything. He simply believes that the head of this organization has certain obligations that preclude certain personal. He paused. He's wrong. But he deserves to meet you as a person rather than as a concept that people have been arguing about. She looked at him. You want to introduce me? Yes. Officially. Yes. She understood the weight of the word in this context. Officially in Luca's world was not a casual thing. It was a statement. A positioning. A declaration of a specific kind that this room would understand completely, and that would have consequences in how the organization understood its structure going forward. You've thought about this, she said. At length, he said, including several written versions that I threw away. She felt the laugh come before she could manage it. He heard it, and the corner of his mouth moved. All right, she said. Introduce me. Donato Farini was 71, with the face of a man who had seen every version of this organization across 4 decades and trusted almost nothing that was new. He shook Adriana's hand with the gravity of someone who was performing an assessment and making no effort to conceal it. Miss Moretti, he said, I've heard a great deal about you. Some of it accurate, I imagine, she said. He looked at her with an expression that recalibrated slightly. Luca tells me you've managed his office for 4 years. I've managed it, she said. I've also corrected 17 significant contractual errors, restructured his scheduling system twice, and on one occasion prevented a financial filing that would have created a regulatory problem that would have cost this organization considerably more than my annual salary. She said it without aggression. Factually, I'm good at my job, Mr. Farini. That has not changed and will not change. Donato looked at Luca. Luca said nothing. His expression said everything. She's direct, Donato said. Yes, Luca said. Your father would have liked her, Donato said. He said it slowly, as though arriving at the conclusion while speaking it, and the arrival seemed to surprise him slightly. Something moved through Luca's face. Yes, he said. He would have. Donato looked at Adriana for a moment longer. Then he nodded once the nod of a man revising a position he had held firmly and finding the revision less uncomfortable than he had expected. Miss Moretti, he said. It was good to meet you. And you, she said. He moved away into the gathering. Luca stood beside her, and she could feel the particular quality of his stillness, not the controlled essence of performance, but the still of something released. He'll talk to the others, Luca said quietly. The ones who had questions. I know, she said. Was that the point? A pause. Part of it. He looked at her. The other part was simpler. What was the other part? I wanted to stand next to you in a room and have that be the obvious and unremarkable truth, he said, rather than something that required explanation. She looked at him. Is it? She said. Unremarkable. He looked around the room at the people who were carefully not watching them, with the particular intensity of people who are absolutely watching them. At Rosa, across the space, who caught his eye and raised her glass slightly. At Marco, near the far wall, who saw him looking and gave the minimal nod of a man who is satisfied with an outcome. Not yet, Luca said. But it will be. It was Rosa who created the moment that the room would remember. She did it the way Rosa did everything, without announcement, without drama, simply by moving through the gathered crowd to the small elevated platform where the family typically made toasts, taking the microphone that nobody had planned to use, and saying, in the carrying voice of a woman who had been making herself heard in crowded rooms for 73 years, before we continue, I want to say something. The room oriented itself toward her with the automatic attention people give to someone who has never in their memory said anything unworthy of attention. This family has spent a great many years being very good at appearing powerful, Rosa said. We have been exceptional at it. We have rooms full of people who are afraid of us and allies who respect us and enemies who avoid us, and we have been very satisfied with all of that. She paused. What we have been less good at is being actual people. Specifically, her eyes moved across the room to where Luca stood, and Adriana standing beside him, and she said it with the simple, devastating clarity of someone who loves someone and has run out of patience with watching them be unhappy. My nephew has been the most powerful man in this room for 12 years and the loneliest man in it for almost as long. The room was absolutely still. He is less lonely now, Rosa said. And I would like to drink to that, and I would like anyone in this room who has a problem with it to come and discuss it with me personally. She raised her glass. To Luca, who finally, at 38 years old, learned the one thing his father always said he would have to learn eventually. Someone said, from the crowd, what thing? Rosa smiled. That the strongest thing a man can do is let someone in. She drank. The room drank. Adriana felt Luca beside her and did not look at him for a moment because she was looking at the room at the faces turning back from Rosa. Some moved, some recalibrating, some simply present in the way of people who have witnessed something they did not expect. She felt the weight of it. Not the organizational weight, not the political weight, but the human weight of a room full of people acknowledging that something real had happened in their presence. Then she looked at Luca. His jaw was set. His eyes were bright in a way she had never seen before, and that she understood was something he would not have allowed anyone to see 3 months ago. He was looking at his aunt with an expression that contained, underneath all the composed layers, something that looked like gratitude and grief and relief braided together. Are you all right? She asked him quietly. He looked at her. Yes, he said. The word came out slightly rough. He cleared it. Yes. She put her hand on his arm. Not a grand gesture. A small one. The specific small gesture of a person telling another person that they are not alone in a room. He looked down at her hand. Then he covered it with his own. They left an hour later, not dramatically, simply because they had stayed long enough, and the evening had given them both enough to carry. On the way out, Marco stopped them at the door. He looked at Luca for a moment, with the expression of a man who has 17 years of things to say, and is going to say very few of them. I owe you an apology, he said. Luca looked at him. For what? For every time I told you that feelings were a liability, Marco said. I was wrong. I was wrong about Sophia, which I have lived with. And I was wrong when I almost said the same thing about Adriana. He looked at her. You were right to stand your ground. Both of you. Adriana looked at him. Marco, you told me to be honest with him. That was what mattered. I told you because I hoped, Marco said. I didn't fully believe it was possible. That's the difference. He met Luca's eyes. I believe it now. Luca looked at his oldest advisor for a moment. Then he said, with the specific economy of two men who have worked together for 17 years and do not require many words, I know. Marco nodded. They walked out. A month after the gathering, on a Tuesday morning that was unremarkable in every way. Except that it was the day Adriana Moretti finally understood that she had stopped waiting for something to go wrong. Luca appeared in her office doorway at 10:30 with his jacket on and his keys in his hand, which was not a posture associated with any meeting on the day's calendar. Come with me, he said. She looked at her screen. I have the Andover follow-up at 11. I rescheduled it. She looked at him. To when, she said. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. I cleared your schedule until 2. He waited. I want to show you something. She was quiet for a moment. This was the territory they had been navigating, the boundary between a decision made about her time and an invitation. She looked at his face and read it the way she had learned to read everything about him, and what she read was not the reflex of a man who had managed an outcome. It was something else. Did you run this meeting in your head and distribute the minutes, she said, or are you inviting me to a decision I'm part of? He looked at her. I rescheduled a meeting. The rest I don't know. I have a destination. I don't know what happens when we get there. That was honest. That was genuinely, completely honest. She closed her laptop. Where are we going, she said. Brooklyn, he said. There's a bookshop. She stopped. A bookshop, she said, a used bookshop, specifically old novels. Specifically the kind of place where nobody cares who you are, and the owner will talk to you for 40 minutes about Tolstoy, if you let her. He said it with the particular combination of self-awareness and commitment that she had come to understand was what Luca Bellondi looked like when he was being completely himself. I have wanted to take someone there for 3 years. I didn't have anyone to take. She looked at him standing in her doorway, this man who had run the most feared organization in New York for 12 years and had walked into a Tuesday morning with his keys in his hand and a bookshop in Brooklyn, and the honest admission that he had been waiting 3 years to share it with someone. She understood, in that moment, the full accounting, not the 2.5 years he had named. All of it. The 4 years of coffee and remembered details and silences that were more articulate than most people's full sentences. The version of Luca Bellondi that existed underneath the organization, and the power and the architecture of control, the man who loved old novels because people in them had no phones, who had been lonely for so long that cold had seemed like the natural temperature, who had written and discarded multiple versions of the most important conversations of his life, before learning to simply say the thing. She stood up. She reached for her jacket. Is the owner actually going to talk to us about Tolstoy for 40 minutes? She said. Minimum, he said. Her name is Helen. She has opinions. I look forward to Helen's opinions, Adriana said. They walked out together, through the building, where 4 years of her life had accumulated, past Greta Marini's desk, where Greta looked up and said nothing, but her expression said everything, past Marco's office, where Marco was on a call, but tracked their exit through the glass, with the quiet satisfaction of a man whose long-held hopes have proven correct, into the elevator, out of the building, into the city. Luca drove, and she sat in the passenger seat, and the Brooklyn Bridge opened around them in the way it always did, enormous, indifferent, magnificent, and they did not talk for a few minutes, which was easy now, silence between them having become the comfortable kind rather than the loaded kind. Then she said, "Tell me about Helen." And he did. He talked about the bookshop the way people talk about the places they go when they need to remember who they are, with a specific warmth of something private and real. Helen had been running it for 30 years. She kept the inventory in a system that existed only in her own head. She had once refused to sell a copy of War and Peace to a man because she didn't believe he was going to read it, and she told him so to his face. Adriana laughed. He heard it and glanced at her, briefly, and she caught the look, the same look she had seen at the gathering, at the restaurant, in his office on the morning he told her a truth he had been holding for 2.5 years. The look of a man who is still, every single time, slightly astonished that the laugh exists, and that it is directed at him. She was not going to tell him that she found that astonishment to be the thing she would protect most carefully in him. That particular piece of information she was going to hold quietly, carry it the way you carry the things that are too essential to put down, tend it the way you tend whatever is most alive. "You're smiling," he said. "I'm aware. What are you thinking?" She looked at him. At the man everyone feared, who had no idea how clearly she could see the man she loved sitting right underneath that, who left coffee on desks without explanation and remembered sisters' presentations and wrote multiple versions of conversations on paper before he could bring himself to have them, who had been cold for so long he'd forgotten warmth was possible and had not said a word about it for 2.5 years because saying it out loud was the most terrifying thing he could imagine, and he had chosen to say it anyway. "I'm thinking," she said, "that you should have taken me to this bookshop 3 years ago." He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said, "I should have." "Don't do that again," she said. "Whatever it is, the thing you want to share, the place you want to go, the thing you've been holding because you didn't have anyone to give it to." She held his gaze for the moment he could spare from the road. "You have someone now." He looked at her. What crossed his face in that moment was not dramatic. It was not the grand gesture or the performed emotion or the version of feeling that makes itself visible so that rooms can acknowledge it. It was quieter than all of that. It was the specific, private expression of a man who has spent decades being the most alone person in every room he walked into, understanding for the first time in his life that he would not walk into rooms alone anymore. "Yes," he said, "I do." The city moved around them. Brooklyn rose ahead. Helen's bookshop was waiting with 30 years of old novels and opinions about Tolstoy and no interest whatsoever in who Luca Bellondi was to anyone except the man who came in on a Tuesday morning with a woman in a green dress and stayed long enough to remember who he was. Adriana Moretti had spent 4 years being excellent at her job and invisible in her life, filing everything that mattered under not relevant, maintaining the careful measured distance of a woman who had decided that wanting things visibly was the fastest way to lose them. She was done being invisible. She was done with the distance. She had walked through the door that Luca Bellondi had spent 20 years making sure he would never open, and she was not walking back, and neither was he, and the only thing left to do was everything that came next, which was, it turned out, exactly enough.